the Time to Wonder podcast, a behind-the-scenes peek into the world of museums for kids of all ages everywhere. Hi, I'm Ava.
Hi, I'm Leslie.
And I'm Sue.
And this is a podcast where kids ask questions about museums.
And we find the answers. This week's big question is, what goes where and how did it get there?
Our two guests are Josh Doherty and Winter Stacey. Josh and Winter are fabrication designers. Josh works at the Museum of Anthropology at the University of British Columbia, and Winter works at the Royal BC Museum.
Hi, Winter. I'm Ava.
Hi, Ava. Nice to meet you.
Hi, Josh. I'm Ava.
Ava, nice to meet you.
I have some questions for you.
Fantastic.
Okay, let's get started. Is everything a museum owns or cares for exhibited?
No. I worked with the Field Museum from Chicago, and their logo is a square, and it says Field, and there's a tiny period, and the period is to represent how much of their collection is on display. And so that's quite often reflected in most museums. So maybe we have 1% or 2% of our collection on display. And so that's a really small number.
Wow, that's interesting. Who decides what goes on display?
It's a mix of people. Often there's a curator who's the person who is coming up with the story and the ideas for an exhibition. And they often get to choose the objects that sort of help tell the story they want to tell. And sometimes that's in collaboration with the exhibit designers, and the designers have an idea about what they want to see in the exhibit too. And sometimes there's an invited guest or like an invited curator or an artist, and they get to have some input on what goes on display and sort of shapes the exhibit and the story they're trying to tell.
How did you figure out that this is something you wanted to do?
Great question. I first started out doing set decoration in high school, in grade 8, and just painting the set for a play that we would do, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a lot of fun to be able to do kind of everything to make something look like something else. So you start out with a piece of wood, and you cut it, and you paint it, and you light it. And so it was really nice and magical, and I thought that I would like to be involved in that after school. So I went into museums the way that I still know that it's what I want to do, because this can change. You're allowed to change your mind. But the way that I know I still like this is my tasks change all the time. So I never get bored. Even if something is boring, it'll be over in a week and there will be the next project.
So what part of putting together an exhibit is yours?
At the Royal BC Museum, my title is Exhibitions Fabrication Specialist. Now, at this point in my career at the Royal BC Museum, I've only been there for a year, whereas some of my colleagues have been there for 18 years. Let's say they have a little bit more seniority over me, and that means that I get the short end of the stick sometimes. So right now, I am painting 100 pieces of wood white.
How exciting.
You have no idea. And sometimes I get to vacuum for 2 weeks. Am I making it magical yet? But then once in a while, you also get to do these crazy, creative, awesome projects that just are so much fun, and you get to do it with your coworkers, and it reignites the spark for creativity. And you're like, this is why I'm here.
Cool. Josh, what about you? What is your part in all of this, putting these exhibitions together?
So my role these days, so I've just left OV and I've moved over to MOA, and I was more like a mix of design and tech over there, and it's similar over here. I've only been here for a month and a half, but the process is there's an exhibit, there's the curators, and there's a story. And then so it's working with the curators to develop the visual part of how the exhibition is going to go together, looking at the gallery spaces and figure out where things are going to fit and what sort of visual storytelling is going to happen. And how do you paint the picture of what you're trying to do in there? There's 5 projectors going in. So there's going to be this huge projection thing going on with all these old photographs. And so I'm in the middle of that and coordinating between artists and designers and the fabrication team and the collections team who are bringing and taking care of all the objects.
Wow, that sounds very complex.
Who's painting all those pieces of wood white?
Right now, it's Heather Painter. Her last name is Painter. Heather and Evan and Katie and Pippa and me and Skooker. So right now, everybody's doing a lot of things. We're all lending a hand right now.
What things do you have to think about when you are planning and designing an exhibit?
One of the early things is thinking about what's the big idea. Is it going to be a fun exhibit? Is it going to be a serious exhibit? What's the big idea? Often people think about what are the things that you want to see in the exhibit and how you want to approach the exhibit and what welcomes you into the exhibit. You start thinking about, do you have to build walls? Is it going to be a big open room? Is it going to be a dark room? Is it going to be a bright room? And so all of those things, how you experience the space and what the feelings you want people to have when they come into the exhibit and how you get people to have those feelings and create spaces. And then you start thinking about how to create space that people can explore and discover, make discoveries. And so that's the big ideas. And then there's how much wire do we need? How many projectors do we need? How many speakers? Do we need to build a bunch of boxes? How many cases do we need? Are there delicate things? Are there dangerous things that we need to protect people from? And then do we have enough time to let the paint dry?
That part sounds incredibly practical, probably adding how many pieces of wood you have to paint white.
Yeah. So we make a lot of lists and we make drawings using computers to lay out the spaces as much as we can and have a good picture of what it's actually going to look like so we can have a good idea of, how many pieces of wood do we need and how much paint is going to need to go on those pieces of wood.
As a technician, so you're not always a person that gets to make big decisions, but at the same time, it's really important to ask questions. And sometimes I'm like, oh, maybe I shouldn't ask that because I should already know. No way. You might be able to see something that somebody else has missed. Hey, by the way, we actually don't have any more paint left. We should go. It's really basic, but you might see something that falls through the cracks of somebody who should be seeing it. And it's very good for you to mention it.
That's a really good point.
I really love it when people mention things.
This one is for Winter. What happens if you break something?
First of all, you have to tell someone. And that's difficult, but you really got to tell someone. And especially if it's an object. That's why we always do care and handling training. It's really important to think about how you are moving and touching these objects that only exist for a finite amount of time. As museum people, we have been asked to hold on to these things and be as careful as we can. So at the very bare minimum, if you break something, you got to tell somebody because maybe they can fix it.
How has technology changed your job?
From when I started in museums, there hasn't been a huge amount of change, but I think that lighting has changed. Lighting technology has changed a lot. And so LEDs weren't really a thing when I first started. And now they're just everywhere. And so you can get really little tiny lights into really interesting places. And that's fun. You don't have to change light bulbs as often. And I think being able to use computers and projections and interactive digital stuff, I think has changed a lot. And I don't love digital interactive stuff because it's always broken, as Winter will attest to. But I think there are some opportunities there that weren't there before. And I think people are still trying to figure out how to use things like virtual reality in museums. And people are trying to use virtual reality in museums and stuff like that. And it's not working super well yet that I've seen. but it's getting closer. And I think that in the next 2 years, like stuff like that is going to be a lot of fun and interesting. But it means we have to learn how to do new things that we didn't do before, which is fun and frustrating.
What's your favorite exhibit?
I really liked the mid-century modern exhibit at the Vancouver Art Gallery that they had maybe 2021 maybe. I went and saw it 3 times because I just enjoyed it so much. I brought my friends and I really like to see what they looked at. That's part of my favorite part of going to an exhibit is looking at the exhibit, yes, reading the things, yes, but also looking at what other people are interested in and discussing that. And especially if you go with a friend, talking about what's your favorite table in here? And then they point and they say that one. And you're like, okay, why? I'm interested. I'm curious. What gets you going? What art do you like? And so I think that the mid-century modern exhibit was pretty spot on for that.
Josh, what's your favorite exhibit?
And I really have a soft spot for Science World. I think all of the big interactive stuff is really fun. And I think there's being able to touch stuff and see stuff and get behind things and look, crawl around and stuff is really cool. I think that's a lot of fun.
I'm with you. I love Science World.
I'm obviously going to have to take Ava to Science World.
I've been there I was more younger. My mama has been there without me. And then after that, she even showed me photos and was like, oh, guess what? I went to Science World. And I'm like, what's the most surprising thing you've learned in your job?
One of my favorite things about this job is actually getting to interact with people and finding out all the cool things they know about stuff. And so every exhibit, I learn something new and crazy. And so the last exhibit I did at Mauve was an Indigenous tattoo exhibition, and we're working with Dion Kazas, and it's the guest curator. And one of the pieces in that there were blood paintings. And so when people are being tattooed, they use like paper towels and stuff to blot the ink and the blood. And so they turned those into a piece. And it was not something I expected that I would find interesting. And once they were framed and mounted on the wall, they were quite beautiful. And then that was quite surprising for me.
If I really wanted to do what you were doing, what should I start doing now to prepare?
Good question. Make sure you like being creative. Yeah, if you want to be doing this type of stuff for work, you should also enjoy doing it in your free time. And I do, which is great. I love that. What should you do now? Practice your drawing. Practice all of the creative things. Learning woodshop was super helpful. I wish I had done that sooner. And just been interested in exploring and learning about things. And not having to know everything, but just get good at tinkering. Don't be afraid to break something because you could probably fix it. And what Josh was saying too about the AV, all of the AV that was brought into the museum 10 years ago doesn't work anymore. Everything has been updated. You think you know everything and then it changes. And so just being good at poking things, really, to figure out how to make them work or how to fix them.
My route into museums was I worked for a number of years in metal shops and woodworking, and I built guitars and just generally liked tinkering and making stuff, just like what Winter was saying. And I ended up doing the industrial design program at Emily Carr, which is thinking about making stuff and designing stuff and thinking about how all the pieces of things fit together. And while I was doing that, I accidentally, one of my classmates his dad is a conservator, and their conservators are the people who take care of objects. And I got hired on to do some mount making, which is like little metal supports for artifacts and objects. And I really liked it. And I kept coming back, and they kept having me back. And I slowly started coming in that way. So there's lots of design programs. I think people will go through architecture into museums, from carpentry. Yeah, love of making things and figuring things out. And it's a really, like Winter said, poking stuff and figuring it out every exhibit is something new that you have to figure out. And everything is the first time it's made that way. So every step of the way is an experiment. And so if you like experimenting and are going to get frustrated and then move through the frustration and try something new, I think the core of what I do is just keep trying new things.
I did a little bit of work at the Children's Museum in Ottawa at what used to be the Museum of Civilization. And I did some consulting on some pieces they had there. And one of the things that really struck me, and I come from a theater background, a museum is like a theater. I don't know if you guys think about that, but you have front of house and you have behind the scenes. And I fell in love with that. Like, one of the best things I thought about working there was that you got to see what the other people didn't see, and you saw the effort. So I was just wondering what you love about behind the scenes.
I really love when, like, what you're describing is that sort of that sense that you get to go in the back. And sometimes I forget how cool that is until I bring someone through. I'm like, oh, let's just go back here. And they go, can we? And it's, oh yeah, my job is really cool because I get to sneak around in the back and I get to use the freight elevator. And seriously, the freight elevator is great. But yeah, and there is that sort of that team that's like quietly in the background, buzzes around and does all that work. All the conservators are repairing stuff and preparing things, and all of the techs are in there painting all the wood white and wiring things, endlessly wiring things and like trying stuff out. And you go and it's like, it can be absolute chaos behind that closed door. And then you step into this pristine gallery and everything is just where it should be. And it is a bit like your Santa's workshop or the secret lab.
Winter, do you want to answer that same question?
It's funny you ask that, actually, because this is part of the reason why I'm not in theater, is because I feel like museums get to tell the same story or different stories that you get to see in theater. But in a museum, it's there for longer. And you get to go up close and you get to sometimes touch these things and you get to be immersed. It's going to the theater and seeing a play, but you get to take part in it. And it stays for longer. You have more opportunity to see it again. More people have opportunity to see it. Most often than not, it's culturally important. You're learning something and it's way more green because in theory, the show that you spent all this time making is around for a year.
Thank you very much for answering our questions.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Nice to meet you. Bye.
Welcome back to part 2. In the next episode, we're going to be learning about skeletons we see in museums. They might be dinosaurs or giant whales.
Ava, you know that in living things, bones are held together with muscle, cartilage, ligaments, and skin.
How do skeletons we see in museums stay together? Why don't they fall apart?
People who are specially trained, we call them skeleton articulators, put the bones together.
How do they do that?
They use metal frames, wires, pins, and cables to make an animal look like it did when it was alive. These frames and pins act like the ligaments that hold bones together.
Let's say someone finds a dinosaur. How do they know what bones go where?
In the case of dinosaurs, paleontologists, those are scientists that study dinosaurs, know what the different bones look like and where they go.
But it's still like putting together a giant jigsaw puzzle, and sometimes there are pieces missing.
What happens when a bone is missing?
Great question. They'll make a bone that looks like the one that's not there.
If you want to see some articulated skeletons, you can find photos at the Time to Wonder podcast.com. These photos come from our series of books called Time to Wonder, a kid's guide to BC's regional museums. The books are a great way to learn about the history of British Columbia before and after settlement. They are also a great guide for when you're traveling in the province or if you're an armchair traveler from home. All 3 volumes are available online or from your local bookstore.
On the website, we've included a photo of a replica 60,000-year-old walrus skull found near Qualicum Beach on Vancouver Island. She's been named Rosie. In the photo, you can see light-colored areas, pieces that were missing from the skull, and created to make the skull complete. The original skull and most of the walrus's bones are kept in the Museum of Nature in Ottawa.
Hey, that's the one I used to go to when I was a kid.
Next time you go back, you'll have to visit Rosie.
In the Qualicum Beach Museum, you can see a real piece of Rosie's rib and a photograph of Rosie's skeleton.
Celinda Nye, the museum at Haida Gwaii, has a fossilized walrus skull from about 42,000 years ago. Fossilized means it was covered with sediment that turned it into something that kind of looks like stone. Only the tusks and facial bones are left. When you look at the website, you can see the differences in the two photos.
Are there recent skeletons in museums or just old ones?
It depends on the museum. At the Whale Interpretive Centre in Telegraph Cove on Vancouver Island, you can see articulated skeletons of marine mammals that are very new, some as recent as 2021. You can hear the people who have articulated many of the marine mammals for the Whale Interpretive Centre on our next episode.
Wow, that's very cool.
Thanks again to today's guests. Our music was written by Kevin MacLeod and is licensed under Creative Commons. For complete information, see our blog post at timetowonderpodcast.com.
For more information on this episode, visit timetowonderpodcast.com. A special thank you to our producer, Danny Rindeau. Thank you, Danny.
If you enjoy the podcast, please subscribe. Remember, next time you go to a museum, look, listen, and wonder.